should have tried just in case. Thank you. Okay, and it's going to be... Okay, is it going to be okay like this? Okay. Yeah. I'm going to move this. The following words. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. Good morning. Where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we say in short, to find meaning, create community, and work for justice. Am I getting that? I'm mixing that up, aren't I? I should know better. We don't have to necessarily do them all in the same order. I'm going to have to write it down because I can't remember it anymore. Well, it's great to have all of you here as always. I want to begin, as always, by welcoming all that you bring with you, all of your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, your differences, all that helps make you who you are, as well as those who might be joining us for the first time this morning. You're equally as welcome today. So welcome to one and all. It is, well, before I go there, let me just welcome everybody who's in the room with us. Catherine is our lay leader today. Thank you so much for being here. She said, thank you, she loves it. Well, we love having you. And Todd Milne's back there kicking us off again, running our AV and also lending us its extraordinary talent. Sunny Cook is there. She's working our slideshow, and it seems to be working for the moment, so thank you, Sunny, so much for being here and your patience with that. Michelina Tyree, our pianist, is with us again today. Thank you so much. Good. And Deb, glad that you're feeling better and are back with us today as well to help lead our music. So welcome to Deb Jackman. So, and of course, again, great to have all of you. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to, I don't even know how to start off talking about the extraordinary week that has just occurred. So much stress and back and forth and uncertainty and all sorts of things that caused us to have a very unusual week. But it seems like for the past 4 years, every week has been an extraordinary, unusual week. So we're getting used to it. And I'm glad that this one has ended so well, at least as far as I'm assuming most of us are concerned. So I don't usually shift the topics of my sermons at the last minute, but we got some news yesterday, and that really shaped, I think, things that needed to happen today. So I'm going to be talking about some of my reflections regarding the election and where I think we should go from here. So I'll sort of push my other sermons out starting next week and whatnot. So sorry for the confusion, but I think this is an extraordinary time, and it deserves a response from the pulpit. So I'll look forward to saying more about the election and my reflection on it in just a few minutes. But for now, I do want to remind you again that our church auction is continuing. So thanks to everyone who has contributed to that and those who have bid on items and helped with this very important fundraiser. It's still happening, so you can still go online and bid if you'd like. We are going to be having our social hour immediately following the service today, so you can find the link to that in the church email that goes out with a list to all the links in your inbox. And I'm going to actually make it to that for a few minutes today, just in case anybody wants to pop in and say hello. It'd be nice to see you. So hopefully I'll see you then as well as with some of the regulars who attend. Okay, that is what I have for now. I'm going to ask you all to take a few moments to greet one another, however you have become accustomed to doing that, using your technology, email, cell phone, smartphone, text, a phone call, or just good old-fashioned telepathy, whatever works for you. Please say hi to someone that you love this morning. right, and please do continue to stay in touch with each other over the days and weeks ahead. We're going to move forward with our service now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
The following words are an excerpt from SAGE, the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. Humans value conformist behavior of many kinds. People are typically expected to comply with social norms and may suffer considerable social costs for behavioral deviance. Obedience, a more specific type of conformity, is also valued. Children are expected to obey the directives of their parents and other authority figures, and are also punished if they don't. Conversely, however, humans also value various forms of deviance. People are often celebrated for generating novel, counter-normative ideas or for resisting the directives of authority figures. The essential tension between conformity and deviance is resolved differently in different human cultures. I would like to add a comment of my own. The freedom to be accepted as a unique individual who is forever encouraged to create a unique life of one's own was very instrumental in my choice to seek immigration in the New World.
Thank you, Catherine. That was beautiful, and your shared sentiments are very special. Yes. And I think that those sentiments are precisely what democracy is all about. So thank you so much. We are now going to kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our hearts and minds, and want to begin with a candle for church member Cindy Fine, whose sister Lonnie Fine Hanka passed away in Boise on November 2nd. That was after a long illness, so please keep Cindy and her family in your thoughts. Also for Kay Brightman, whose husband Rich Brightman passed away in May after a long illness. Kay and Rich have been coming to our church for many years. They had to move away temporarily for the past few months. But Kay is now back and asked that we keep her in our thoughts at this time. Let's take a moment of silence on behalf of others who may be on your hearts and minds this morning. And as always, you're welcome to share those names or say those names aloud if you'd like. Those named aloud, those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. And we are now going to have our story for all ages. So please gather round. whatever it is you do from home to signify the story of all ages is here. I've seen a couple of photos of the kids standing in front of the TV watching, so that's pretty special. It's also always very special to have our good friend, everybody's favorite discoverologist, Dr. Marty Pants, with a Z with us. That's Tance with a... Oh, you already said that. I got it right this time, I remembered. So why don't you remind us what exactly it is that a discoverologist does, because I just love to hear you say it. A discoverologist is a ditetraanthropomorph that utilizes protoplasmic endowments and ocular faculties to kinesthetically ascertain phenomenon. Okay, that's wonderful. And what incredible things have you discovered lately? Just this week, I discovered an extraordinary way to govern civilization. Wow, that does sound incredible. What is it called? I call it choiceism. Choiceism, well, that's an interesting name. How exactly does it work? Well, in a choiceism, everyone has a choice in the decisions that are made. Well, can you say a little bit more? Yes, everyone gets a card with all the different possible choices on it, and then they check the ones they like. That sounds a bit familiar. Then what happens? Then all the cards are counted, and whichever choices have the most check marks are the winners. You know, Professor Pants, that's Pants with a Z. Yes, Professor Pants with a Z. You just described democracy. Yes, and I discovered it. Well, you know, democracy has been around for 2,500 years. It was first discovered by the Greeks. And did everyone get to make a choice then too? Well, not everyone. Only those who were considered citizens, and which didn't include slaves or foreigners or even women. Well, that hardly sounds like choiceism to me. In choiceism, everyone gets a choice. Yes, well, in democracy, we call it a vote, and we've been in a democracy in the United States for more than 200 years. I see. Has everyone always had a vote? Well, not exactly. You know, just like in ancient Greek society, I guess, slaves and foreigners and women weren't allowed to vote for a long time. But now everyone gets a vote. Well, now everyone is supposed to get a vote, but some still have a hard time voting. How come? Well, we have some strange law that if a person goes to jail, they lose their right to vote. Oh, no. They must have done something terrible. Well, a lot of the times it's just for breaking unnecessary rules, and it seems some kinds of people are more likely to go to jail than others. Any other reasons people can't vote? Well, I hate to admit it, but yes, some people are turned away from voting because of strict ID rules, and some because their names have been removed from the voting list. It doesn't sound to me like your democracy is anything like choiceism. In choiceism, everyone has a choice. Period. You know, Dr. Pants, that's Pants with a Z. Yes, you know, Dr. Pants with a Z. I hope that our democracy can continue to become more like your choiceism. Yes, and I discovered it. Thank you, Dr. Pants with a Z.
The most important thing in your life right now is for you to find your own inner truth and follow it. I wrote these words for the All Little Nature Chapel. Being true to ourselves is one of the essential achievements for which we must all strive in order to lead a life that reflects our deepest aspirations. Believe in your own magic. Believe in your own light. As you do so and act accordingly, you will not only create a meaningful existence for yourself, but also enhance the opportunities of those who will be touched by you. Namaste.
For our reading today, I'm going to read a reading by David Eaton, the Unitarian minister, entitled A Common Destiny, which I think is something really important for all of us, if possible, to remember right now especially. All living substance, all substance of energy, beings, and purpose are united and share the same destiny. All people, those we love and those we know not of, are united and share the same destiny. Birth to death, we share this unity with the sun, earth, our brothers and sisters, strangers. Flowers of the field, snowflakes, volcanoes, and moonbeams. Birth, life, death, unknown, known, unknown. Our destiny from unknown to unknown. May we have the faith to accept this mystery and build upon its everlasting truth.
Well, Todd is not the only one switching things around today. Last night I called Michelina, and she so kindly agreed to help me do something at the very last minute. Our president-to-be, Joe Biden, actually quoted from the book of Ecclesiastes last night in his speech, and a lot of us are more familiar from those words when they were put into song by Pete Seeger. So I'm going to do Turn, Turn, Turn for you from that book. And some of Joe's words will be in there, his quote. Sing along if you want to. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under
Thank you so much, Deb. Thank you, Michelina. Beautiful. Now the question before us all is, what time is it? Or what is the time before us going to be like? 4 years ago, this Sunday, this room was filled with a standing room only crowd, yearning for comfort and help making sense out of what had just happened, the election of the most unfit candidate ever to the U.S. presidency, despite what the polls had reassuringly predicted. And that's polls, P-O-L-L-S. For people watching the angst-ridden election coverage this past Tuesday, it seemed as if history was repeating itself, as the hopes of those desperate for change steadily eroded throughout the night. But the next day, the picture improved, at least for those who voted Democrat, as key states began returning the result of millions of mail-in ballots, which were overwhelmingly in support of the incumbent's challenger, and steadily climbed as the counting continued throughout the week. The outcome, which I'm guessing most of us here are pleased with, was finally announced yesterday. But there is still much to feel anxious about. Many of the problems facing us yesterday are still facing us today. Trump will remain in office until January, is unlikely to ever concede, and is likely to continue spreading lies and conspiracy theories about the election results that could further divide our nation, if not lead to violence and unrest. The number of COVID-19 cases and resulting deaths is now higher than ever in our nation, and far higher than anywhere else in the world, and for the most part, we're all still on lockdown because of it. We're also still facing global warming, lots of unrest due to continued inequality in our country, and of course, a looming economic disaster if we can't get the pandemic under control soon. Still, after 4 stressful years of an erratic, incompetent, unchecked narcissist running the country, today affords a more hopeful outlook that many of us have grown accustomed to. But before we look ahead, let's take a short step back to election night when it still looked like things were going in the other direction. Many of us saw all the red on the map and wondered how it is possible for so many to have voted to re-elect Donald Trump. And I know it's possible that a few joining us today may have preferred Trump to Biden, and as far as I'm concerned, you're welcome here too. But ours is a liberal religion, and most of us vote accordingly, and must be ministered to with this in mind, just as I tried to do at least 4 years ago when the shoe was on the other foot. In fact, what I want to do for a bit right now is to advocate for the Trump voters, because I'm guessing many of them feel a lot like some of us did 4 years ago, and like us are now wondering how so many people could have possibly voted for the other candidate. This is so, I believe, because all of us, whatever party we prefer, are subject to cognitive dissonance. This is just how our brains work, which prevents us from acknowledging the information that we dislike. Like Sherlock Holmes, we conclude that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth. The problem with cognitive dissonance, however, is that we are never able to eliminate all the possibilities because we can't comprehend all of them to begin with. And because we can't, we end up believing we've thought of everything imaginable. Unable to see any other possibilities, we think whatever remains in our minds must be the truth. To further complicate the matter, Different groups have different dissonance. So Republicans see different priorities than Democrats do. And Democrats are willing to overlook concerns the Republicans aren't, and vice versa. This is why millions of good-hearted people voted for Donald Trump 4 years ago and did so again this week. Many of those who did not, cannot understand how so many could have supported a man who had proven to be so cruel, totalitarian, incompetent, and just plain dumb in so many of the things he says and does. Just 2 days ago, I received an email from a local social justice organization stating, "This election was a referendum on race, white supremacy culture, racial equality, and racial justice. Voters showed up by the millions to say yes to white supremacy." In addition to being a cup half full interpretation of the outcome, I disagree with this oversimplified characterization of the election, of the electorate. Suggesting it was strictly about racism and that anyone who voted for Donald Trump must have done so because they are white supremacists denies the complexity that is inherent in all individuals, as does the Republican claim that anyone who voted for Biden must be a socialist. I voted for Biden, and I can assure you I am not a socialist. It's also true that Cuban Americans showed strong support for Trump in Florida, not because they are white supremacists, but because, at least for some, the claims they heard about Biden being a socialist triggered a lot of understandable fear, justified or not. So I was dumbfounded on election night, when things weren't looking so good for the Democrats, to hear CNN commentator Van Jones suggest that his party is going to have to do a better job appealing to Latino voters, specifically referring to Cuban Americans. He made this comment against that common backdrop of blue dots representing heavily populated urban areas surrounded by a sea of red rural communities in almost every state. I immediately thought how much more sense it would make to say we should try appealing to all American voters, especially to the millions living in rural communities who feel disenfranchised from the Democratic Party. Insinuating that all Republicans are white supremacists, or that they should only focus on the interest of select identity groups just to get their numbers up, is part of why Democrats keep doing so poorly in rural communities. Why write off half the country instead of reaching out to them, asking what they need, finding our common ground, and building relationships based on shared values and concerns? This is an especially good question for those of us in this part of the world, because unlike most of the so-called red states, which had tight races, our next-door neighbors were solidly in Trump's camp. Idaho voted 64% in his favor compared to 33% for Biden. In Montana, it was 57% to 40%. And in Wyoming, it was 70% to 27%. I'm not saying this to suggest that we need to convince anyone that they should be voting our way, only to point out that there are plenty of people in our own neck of the woods that aren't or feel ideologically alienated from us. We have to work on building relationships with them by, again, mutually discovering our common ground. And that can't happen by narrow-mindedly calling them racists, bigots, and rubes, any more than it can by calling us godless, communist baby killers. Last year, I spoke with a man who voted for Trump and said he felt he was doing a good job. When, with genuine curiosity, I asked him why, he told me he liked his record on job creation and deregulation. You can imagine how surprised I was when he also revealed that he had voted twice for Barack Obama. for the same reasons that he voted for Trump, because his priority was his desire, his desperate desire for meaningful change in this country. With this goal in mind, he considered few other priorities, finding a way to ignore many of the things that most troubled others about Trump. I also have 3 sets of neighbors living next door and across the street from me who are Trump supporters. And there are also great neighbors who would do anything for me, even though one of them likes to tease me about my liberal politics, which I don't mind at all. Like all of us, what motivates these individuals is complicated and cannot be reduced to overly generalized and judgmental one-liners in emails or on social media. To be clear, I'm not suggesting it's solely up to us to have relational conversations with millions of Americans who think differently about politics than we do, especially not for the dehumanizing purpose of winning them over to our side. The humanistic ethic requires that nobody becomes a means to our ends. Rather, they are to be encouraged by us to pursue their own ends. Such an effort has to become a concerted, long-range strategy by the Democratic Party with the goal of meaningfully helping our neighbors who are seeing their rural way of life disappear as millions of Americans migrate into cities, as are people around the world. Today, more than 80% of Americans live in cities, compared to 200 years ago when it was only 5%. The farther away these shrinking communities are from metro areas, urban areas, the worse their economics are becoming. And as they watch their property values decline, local businesses go under, their friends and families move away. As Democrats, we don't need to seek their votes, we need to seek their welfare by figuring out how to help them continue thriving in a time of upheaval and disruption. This holds true for those living in coal and oil country who are also wondering how they will get by now that coal has gone bankrupt and oil is on its way out in the wake of solar and wind technologies that are producing the cheapest, greenest, healthiest energy in human history. Of course, some of them don't want to face the reality of global warming because the green energy revolution has killed their economies, their communities, and their way of life while leaving them with nowhere else to go. Millions of our neighbors now have rusty belts, empty bread baskets, dry wells, and abandoned mines. Yet how many of us are in the streets demonstrating our care for them, demanding that our government help them through this difficult and uncertain period? Whether they are sincere or not, the Republicans have done a much better job promising to make their lives great again by bringing back farming, oil, coal, steel, and other bygone industries. This isn't about winning votes, it's about human welfare, it's about compassion. And if we can genuinely offer this, the votes will follow. So that's my big takeaway from this election. But I have a couple of other points I want to make. Among them is how happy I am with the historic turnout, which included more ballots cast than any other election in American history, both for the winner and for the loser. Whoever had won, this much seems indisputable. It would have been a fair and democratic process. Despite Trump's unsubstantiated, self-serving, and insane claims to the contrary, we waited 4 days for all the necessary votes to be meticulously and openly counted before a winner was declared, all thanks to mail-in ballots. And I'm not naive. I know we have a history of voter suppression, of forcing major demographics like women and blacks to have to fight for their constitutional right to vote. After passing the Voting Rights Act, such suppression went underground, erecting the new Jim Crow era of mass incarceration, disenfranchising millions of black and brown voters by conjuring up an expensive and unnecessary drug war, and in more recent years, massive voter purging and stringent voter ID laws. Still, I hope what occurred this week becomes the wave of the future for all our elections because it makes voting easy, accessible, and eliminates a lot of the mechanisms by which voter suppression occurs, including deterring and detouring voters who try to cast their votes at a shrinking number of available polling centers, and puts the onus on state governments to send every eligible voter a ballot without them having to show up every year with multiple forms of ID before they can vote. I suspect after this year's result, there will be some politicians who will work hard to prevent the widespread use of voting by mail in the future. But I also predict the genie cannot be put back in the bottle, and I'm glad of it. Mail-in voting just democratized our democracy. I'd also mention this election in particular, like most of the presidential elections during my lifetime, was too narrow to consider a mandate, even though the opposite has already been claimed. Winning 52% of the vote cannot be described or considered a true mandate, not when nearly half the country feels that they have lost. Saying otherwise only widens the divide between us by making a number of us feel invisible and like our voices no longer matter. If I had $1 for every time I've heard a Republican refer to what Americans want, referring only to their own constituents while making me feel insignificant or that they don't consider me an American if I disagree, then I'd be a rich man, but remain poor in spirit. Landslides and mandates may be declared in nations like Russia, Turkey, and Bolivia, where widespread election fraud is routine, but not in America, where millions of votes are to be counted. I'm also glad that Joe Biden has begun with such a conciliatory tone, empathizing with the disappointment of those who didn't vote for him, assuring them that he wants to do his best to serve them as well, and telling all of us that we need to help bring this grim era of demonization to an end. I think he was talking to us liberals at least as much as he was to conservatives. If we're demonizing and thus dehumanizing those we disagree with, we're on the wrong side of history, of politics and of ethics, no matter what party we belong to. Another point to make, as important as this election is, at least for the morale of those of us who have felt traumatized by the Trump administration, the office of the presidency and the federal government itself are losing their overall significance in our nation and in our world. In other words, who the president is and which party is in control doesn't mean as much as it did just a few years ago. During his presentation at Abundance Digital's 2020 EXO World Summit, technology forecaster, futurist, and consulting professor at Stanford University, Paul Saffo, made an astounding claim. Digital technology is a solvent leaching the glue out of our international order. And the institution that seems to be dissolving most rapidly is the same one that dominated the geopolitics during the 20th century, the nation state. He went on to predict that by the middle of this century, just 30 years from now, that the United States will cease to exist as a meaningful entity. The forces afoot today, he says, are already changing the geopolitical landscape and creating an opening for a new challenger as the dominant political force in this century, and that is the city-state. City-states are stepping into the vacuum left by waning nation-state power. And that's an entire sermon in and of itself. But in brief, a state is distinguished by a defined territory and population. A state is distinguished by a defined territory and a population. A nation by abstractions like culture, history, and commonality. A nation is more of an idea we hold about ourselves. A nation-state exists when the two of these coincide, and it begins to dissolve when they don't. Today, obviously, Americans are no longer bonded by a unified culture, history, and commonality. Likewise, due to globalization and the communications revolution, the once well-defined borders of both nations and states have become blurred. It is now possible for a large city in a state to be a major economic player in the global economy by directly partnering with communities around the world. This is a major reason those recoiling from the end of the nation-state era and from their identity with their nation are obsessed with border control in a futile effort to reestablish those once distinct lines. Nation-states require passports, Sappho points out, because they have citizens. But city-states don't, because they have residents. This explains why cities around the nation have ignored federal orders to deport immigrants, and why some have declared themselves sanctuary cities against the government's wishes. Cities have residents who contribute and get something in return. They don't need passports. A city-state, which he calls the perfect confluence of commerce, culture, and governance, is defined by a distinct geographical area, an outsized economy, makes a global impact, and has a unique culture that helps create social cohesion. The Bay Area is a good example. Sappho says San Francisco alone has a GDP larger than the entire nation of Saudi Arabia. It has spawned major world players, Google, Twitter, Apple, and Facebook. And it certainly has its own culture, as do cities like Portland, Seattle, Atlanta, Miami, and so on. Increasingly, these city-states are defying federal authority, as with immigration issues. More importantly, they are filling in the void left by the failures of federal government to function. Despite Trump's pullout of the Paris Climate Agreement, for example, major cities stayed in on their own. Others have had to tackle COVID-19 for themselves, given the lack of a unified federal response. Additionally, they're able to barter deals and establish partnerships with other cities all over the globe, regardless of what nation they are in. As of 2007, most of the world's population moved into cities. Huge change, rapid change. It's on us right now. And these are today's new power centers, not the totalitarian populists elected around the world in a futile effort to resist these inevitable changes. The power goes where the people are, and that is in cities. It is in local urban communities. I say this now because I think it's important for all of us to stop thinking so provincially about the world we live in today, and about who is in charge and who our neighbors are. This week's election was a big deal for a lot of reasons. But we should understand how fast our world is changing, and that as individual residents in a city-state, we have far more power to influence matters than we do as United States citizens. We can have direct relationships with our city councils and with our county commissions, which on our behalf have direct influence with our state government, which can now bypass federal commands and transcend its borders as a world player. That's a huge shift, and it requires a huge shift in how we think about ourselves and what we do to transform our societies. Finally, as I've said many times, it remains up to each one of us to pursue our values and principles no matter what circumstances we are in, including who is or isn't living in the White House. What we do now is what we've been doing for the past 4 years, and the 4 years before that, and before that, and before that, acting and advocating to make our dreams for the world come true, by pressing our societies to become more just and inclusive and compassionate. Although presidents come and go, governments fail, and nations decline, these principles remain and are the enduring powers that belong to us all. Thank you.
Well, I don't often, in fact, I don't think I ever have said anything from my microphone after a sermon, even though I often go up to Todd and thank him afterwards. Wow. I loved it. It was comforting, it was informative, and it was just fascinating, all rolled in one. And it especially helped me because I was born in that Kellogg, Idaho, so North Idaho. When I was a kid, believe it or not, that panhandle was very blue. It is not anymore. And those people over there are hurting. So it's always been a push-pull in these circumstances for me. We're going to sing a song that's easy to sing. It's called There's a River Flowing in My Soul. And it has the word soul in it. And I know that some of us, I'm becoming more comfortable with that. I think for a while I always wondered about the word soul. It was kind of couched in what I think are too narrow terms. Now I think of it as our essence of who we are. And this song talks about soul and heart and mind. And I wanted to do it because of individualism, which Todd will be talking about next week. And also because Joe Biden fought for the soul of this country and its values. So there's a river flowing in my soul. Sing along. We'll have our words above. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul, and it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing
universe and the light of the stars come through me. Rumi. Be a messenger of the universe. Be a ray of starlight, and you will be instrumental in the transformation of the world. Namaste. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.
Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom.